Awesome. Hi, I'm Dan. I've been working at Vercel for the last 2 years now as a brand designer. I've got like 100 slides to get through, so I'm going to try and be pretty rapid. But I wanted to kind of cover what the brand design role at Vercel is kind of turning into. There is, I think there's like a need for us to work faster, which is crazy because everybody in like the product side and in the engineering side is working like 10x faster. And we can't really support the amount of work that needs to go out in order to support how fast they're able to ship things. So a lot of the work I've been doing recently is basically figuring out the best way to build tools that can help brand enable the rest of the team to ship faster. There's a bunch of different stuff that I'm going to show, and yeah, let's get into it. So a little bit about myself. I've been in like design generally for the last like 15 years. Very multidisciplined. So I studied like graphic design and communication at uni. Have worked at all different types of companies of different sizes in different roles. Yeah, I've kind of covered everything. And like one thing I guess that I think has really benefited me recently within the last like year or so is that I think the kind of multidisciplined approach has really enabled like AI workflows to be like the best partner, because I think just having a little bit of knowledge about a lot of different things is something that, yeah, it kind of enables you to do ridiculous amounts of work by just having a little bit more context about different areas of design and brand and products and things like that. You know, I work at Vercel. I work in black and white like most of the time, but a lot of my like freelance past has been lots of color, lots of 3D, lots of motion design. I've worked with a bunch of people in this room. Yeah, and yeah, I've done lots of different things, but like brand and being like multidisciplined has been what has kind of drawn me into a role where being a brand designer that, you know, although a lot of the work I do is to the developer audience, I'm still able to kind of push myself pretty thin, but still have fun whilst doing it. And then I live in Bristol with my wife and my dog Mishka. Also just wanted to cover that if anybody has a Shiba, you'll understand that you know, they molt like crazy, and he's 8 years old, and his favorite toy or like plaything is actually like the lint roller sheets. Very ironic. When I'm not designing, like my favorite thing to do is just be in the garden, gardening, like horticulture. I think if I didn't work in design, I would still have some sort of creative output through like gardening, and it's something that I'm very proud of. So I guess I'll kick things off by talking about back in 2025 when we did the Ship 25 brand. It was like the first time I was really encouraged to like lean all in on like generative AI, like how far can we push it? What can we do? Versus like normally we build a brand system, it would be very kind of slow. There'd be lots of iteration and processes that would, you know, make that initial period of mood boarding and concepting to get like leadership sign off very kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of friction in that process. So this was like one of the first projects I worked on when I joined Vercel, and it was basically putting together a creative, I guess, this is further than a mood board, but like I'd say a pitch to leadership about like the different directions we could take Ship in. So there was 4 different directions. Everything on here is made through generative AI with like the soft touch of like bringing something into Figma or Photoshop to clean something up. But I think one of the best things about generative AI is that you can get a visual across very quickly. You're not having to invest like hours of time. So like I'm somebody that has spent years working in Cinema 4D. So being able to produce a render that, you know, has some problems, there is some slop, but it still gets the idea across to somebody in the marketing team or, you know, a stakeholder that can't necessarily see a vision with you describing it. You need to see a visual. You know, I think this kind of process really helped be able to decide like what we wanted to do. And yeah, we ended up going with this direction 4, and it was the concept was based around ferrofluids. So it was like a black liquid, has like magnetic fields flowing smoothly, then forming these sharp structure spikes. It was developed by NASA, and the reason why we kind of led into this fluid approach was that we recently launched Fluid Compute, and it kind of tied in nicely to that campaign, and it felt like a nice kind of continuation of what we were doing with that launch. And then typically, once something gets picked, it's kind of when we go all in on like creative exploration, like how can we make this work as like interaction? Once again, like coming back into Cinema 4D, like I use so many different tools. You know, I'll touch on it a little bit a bit more. You know, how can that work as a call to action, and what that looks like in 3D versus like the practicalities of what that looks like on the web. And we started doing some really nice stuff, but yeah, there's some more stuff here as well, like building out prototypes in V0 and like testing. This was when I think it was like the very first version of Google VO was out, and like some of the motion that come out of it was really beautiful, and you know, definitely possible in cinema, but would have been a lot more time to kind of produce a render like that. And then I got a message saying like it was time to pivot because it turns out that ferrofluid was triggering tryphobia in people. And this was something where like we work really open at Vercel, so like we have Slack channels, like it's the most crazy Slack I've ever seen, but we work very publicly so everybody can kind of see what's happening. And yeah, we got like a bunch of feedback that people were starting to feel sick and nauseous and stuff like that. And I think that with generative AI, it was very easy for us to pivot away from it being spiky and horrible to being much more smooth and velvety and delicate, and immediately like had this brand like continue on without there being like a huge blocker. One of the problems that we ran into though was like consistency in the generated images. So at this time, there wasn't like GPT image, there wasn't Nano Banana. This was all done on Flux. I think it was Flux 2. But at the time, you could train LoRa's. So like once we had a big enough library of images, training them on the very specific like renders and lighting that we liked, it was a lot easier to reproduce the same images. It looked a little bit like this. So you'd kind of, this was all through Kriya, by the way. It's like a web app that there's a bunch of different features on there that you can use lots of different generative AI models. But it kind of looked like this. There was 29 images that went into it, and it made it a lot easier for us to then generate images that felt on brand and felt more like in the system. So the total generations of images, video assets, and things like that totaled 36,000. You can see like the usage. So I started working on Ship in January, and we shipped like the full brand system, all of the deliverables and stuff like that in April. And I think out of the 36,000, there was maybe like 10 images that we used. You can kind of see that this visual on the right here, this triangle made from fluid, super beautiful, completely AI. I think I retouched a little bit of it in Photoshop, adjusted the levels, but generally was really impressed. And this was at the time where there was like video models being released a lot. So testing them and seeing what worked, I think the winner at that point in time was VO. So there was like a bunch of these like ripple loops that we were trying to achieve. None of them felt perfect. And I think this is still the case now where if you're, regardless of it being the same prompt or whatever you're doing, you're using the same model but giving it the same prompt, the outcome is almost different every single time. So like regardless if you're using a LoRa or anything that can help like guide the style, you're like playing a slot machine in the sense that you're still kind of, you're gaining luck from what you can achieve. But one of them come out like this. This was like rendered at 1080p. Brought into After Effects. I think I had to remove a couple of duplicate frames, but like this is something that I don't know how I would even approach doing this in Cinema 4D. It was like the hero visual for Ship. But one of the things that comes out from using generative AI, and I think this is what kind of helps by having a bit of an understanding of like other tools and software when it comes to generating images, like I think knowing how to get to something close to this is really important. So the location that we hosted Ship in New York, it was like a 60-foot like storefront. So we had to produce a graphic that could print at that scale. And we were using like all the generative upscales. And it actually worked out that me just going into cinema, matching the lighting, matching the model as close as I could, was able to get really close representation of what we had. And I think just like highlighting the importance of, regardless of what AI is capable of doing, I think it's better to have that like kind of understanding and knowledge of like, okay, how would I do this if I was doing this manually or through like the software that I do know? Yeah, so that was all done manually. One of the other things that I worked on was this shader. So at the time, I think this is before I started like jumping into tools like Claude or V0 or anything like that. I looked at like a After Effects tutorial to create a caustics pattern. So once again, tying into the liquid, things like that. Bringing this into Cinema 4D to create the dot matrix version. So there's like a cloner that clones to based on the luminance map. And this was this was actually the setup of like how that initial shader was generated and then how I projected that light to create this like front-on reflective texture. So you can kind of see it being reflected onto the floor there. There's another example of how that was working. And then like the final outcome, like you can barely see it in this image. And if I'm honest, you could barely see it in person. But like this subtle like dot matrix grid that just helped frame the stage. It was, you know, a lot of what I do is very subtle and minimal. And most of the time I'm stripping things back to barely nothing. But it kind of achieved exactly what we were hoping for. And to talk about V0 as well, so like this was when I first picked up using like anything to do with, I guess, what you would call vibe coding or doing anything of the nature of like using prompts or conversation to make like web applications or prototypes or anything like that. And I think Yav's in the room right now, but I think handing off like the registration schedule to him, like instead of explaining like exactly how I wanted specific interactions to work, I think initially I built out this like the liquid-based interaction where like each line would wobble based on a click. And once again, 9 times out of 10, we end up removing most of the things to make it more like the better UX there. But yeah, I think that's one of the first times where like the V0 code had made its way into the production site on Vercel. And just to touch a little bit more on conferences and like the brand design when it goes into our events, we had a Next.js Conf, which happens every year in San Francisco. And like 2 months before the event, G said, oh, we want to host an event this straight after, the day after, called Ship AI. And it kind of made us think, OK, we need to make a brand system that it's the same venue. There's like that benefit that it's all the same formats, but we want to make a brand that feels consistent, that can work across both days and still feel different. So this is where like the first tool I built that could work with, I guess, pattern generating. I think like I've seen a bunch of different people do tools like this, where you can kind of generate patterns and things like that, where there was one for Ship AI, there was one for Next.js Conf. You could export them as SVGs. There was different asset sizes and things like that. But that was like the first pattern tool that I built that really felt like I was saving time in the sense that, of course, I think you could do this in Figma very easily, but moving around, whereas being able to just click like regenerate to see something, and you can kind of see when something works and something doesn't. And this type of repetitive process, that's like my favorite thing when it comes to building any sort of tool that can save time. It's like removing the repetition and the boring stuff. And a lot of what we do is trying to bring the digital side into the event and the event into the digital side. And we work with Basement Studio on this particular hero. But we captured what we were going to be doing at the event and brought that into the hero itself as the countdown. And you can see this is what the courtyard ended up looking like. And going back again, I think that the thing about having the understanding and that context of different tools, it's like I didn't have any idea what a lenticular panel would look and work like in regards to how much scale I needed to scale up a logo to, how the panels would break the logo and things like that. So being able to jump into Blender at this point and actually mock that up and be like, OK, this is the right scale, this is going to work. Yeah, like having that understanding, I think this is where I don't know how AI ever catches up with that, being able to quickly test things like this. For sure, I think there's MCPs with Blender now, but still being able to build this yourself and understand how the lenticular angles work, and it's something that's really important. And then we do an OG card normally every year where for each event, somebody can come onto the registration page. Once they register for the event, they can generate their own card. So it's normally a ticket or a badge. We decided to do a generative graphic, so they could basically prompt into existence whatever they desired. And there was 2 different LoRa's trained for each version. They were very similar, but we had the black and white mono for Ship AI, and then the Next.js Conf was the blue, the hero color for the brand. And once again, trying to how do we bring this into the actual event itself? And we created this pixel art idea where you'd go and take your picture taken, you could have a collectible card printed, and it just went down really well. I think there's certain things where we used AI to train the pixel style. So you'd kind of have an input image. It would then generate the pixel art. I think, once again, this was using using Flux. It would generate it on a green background. It would run it through a background removal model. And actually, one thing that I do want to say about this is one of the things that comes in really handy when it comes to talking with agents and talking with models is that to get to this point, I was trying to figure out the way to color the pixel image. So I could generate it in black and white, but I couldn't generate it in the same consistent blue. And I didn't understand or know how to prompt into existence what a Photoshop gradient map is. So for anyone that knows Photoshop, there's a tool called a gradient map where you can pick the dark color and the light color, and you can kind of squeeze it. And just explaining to I think I was using V0 at the time, explaining to V0 that that's what I wanted to achieve, and describing the Photoshop knowledge I had, and this is what I wanted it to do. It found a Sharp library that did the exact same thing. I had no idea what Sharp was. But yeah, I guess the takeaway from that is that being able to bring your context of what you do know, the chances are it has the context of both. So if you can kind of bring what you do understand and how you can translate that well, yeah. And basically, this was made up from the picture was taken. The Z index here is the picture was taken. There was a background texture. There was a foreground texture which had the logo, and then it was die cut. And then when it comes to training the images, it was done like this. So you would have a base image and what you were expecting it to come out like. And once it had that, and the model at that time was the Flux context trainer, it was pretty consistent. I think the pixel art is very forgiving. I think even now, we've generated headshot generators for the Ship speakers, and you kind of have to do it 2 or 3 times until you start seeing likeness. And I think that's up to interpretation. But the pixel art definitely made it more forgiving. So that was something that could be a lot more accessible on the day. So this is slightly different, but one of the V0 team were running an event, and they wanted to have a photo booth. And I had no idea how to set that up for them in the sense that it was going to be running in San Francisco. I'm based in Bristol, and they wanted to collect information about like a zine they're building. And my concern was that in order to have that work, I'd need to be there in person, or I'd have to set something up. So I built a web app that basically, before they could launch it on their local machine, they would run, they would bash this command here. So they would drag this setup sh file into their terminal window. And it ensured that basically how I had it set up locally, providing they had terminal, and like we have a very technical marketing team, so this was very easy to them, but I was concerned that it wouldn't translate. So I was like, how can I make this as simple as possible? And that was basically, they had, they'd open terminal, they'd have the downloaded sh file, they'd drag it in. As soon as they dropped it, it would initiate the print server. So one of the biggest concerns about running a full screen web app was that you'd see the print dialog pop up from Mac. And this completely navigated that. So this sent the image to a server. It then sent the image back to the local hosted version that was connected to the cafe Wi-Fi, and then that would connect to the printer. So it kind of alleviated any of the need to have any of the print dialogues pop up. It would then send that to the printer. It was like the first time I'd worked with hardware where I don't know, it felt very inspiring in the sense I was like, holy shit, I can't believe we can code with hardware now. And you can see you could test the network immediately, and you could see if it was going to connect and print. And yeah, it was just super smooth. I didn't expect it to go as well. And as well, so part of that, so once you took your picture and they filled out the form, they would be sent an email. And typically, I think we use something called NAC for all of our marketing emails. And the templates that we currently have are awful, and they're very hard to customize. And I think it's so much easier now. I think we use Resend for this campaign, but I don't know, it felt incredible to be able to create an email. It's very simple, but the fact that this could be a custom email that was connected to was connected to the marketing site, and having to email the IT team and be like, hey, can I get the DNS records to add to the Resend account in order to make this work, and having to go through all that rigmarole. But it was completely seamless, and I think that this is something that I never imagined doing. When it comes to DNS, it's me buying a domain and setting up a WordPress account 5 years ago. I've never thought about doing anything like this. How am I for time, by the way?
You're good. You're good.
Okay, I've still got 50 slides left. Okay, okay. So I'll try and go quicker. So one of the biggest issues we've had at Vercel is our OG card system, and there are so many different Figma templates. We have a Figma component system for everything you could ever need, but it still gets broken. Everybody uses them differently. It was a real friction point where we were slowing down people in order for them to be able to ship their blog post or their product release. So this was my first bigger project, trying to build software in the sense that how can this work and benefit the wider team. And I built a tool called Leap, which basically, it was a completely new OG card system, so designed from the ground up. I created maybe 12 initial templates. Those were all created in Figma and brought into, I think I was using Cursor and Claude 4.5 at the time. This was done back in January. And I just created a whole system that had all of the guardrails. Everyone could come and log in with Slack. And there was just every template that we initially had, but with just better user interface that they could easily engage with. And it was a lot harder to break this. So the biggest unlock for this was enabling people to ship fast without then needing the brand resource. And I built in a bunch of features, if they put too long of a text in, it would generate, based on our tone of voice guidelines, it would generate new headlines, and they could click through them and get something that feels more on brand and shorter. One of the bigger issues was that people were putting in headlines on the OG card template and overfilling 9 times out of 10. So this kind of alleviated any of the stress of that. So yeah, visibility, right. I built a dashboard, so everyone in the creative brand team, they would have this approval process. So when it's submitted, so anyone could come in and submit an OG card. As soon as it's submitted, we get tagged in Slack. We could go into the dashboard on Leap, see what's been submitted. We can then open it up, delete it, whatever. But most of the time, we'd go and edit it. And that would be to do things there might be a line break that isn't quite right. I think I built something in called Magic Balance that had optimal line breaks, but still people would break it. So sometimes it was literally a case you'd go in, break one word onto a different line, and then save and submit. But it just removed a whole lot of friction. And the Slack bot process for this as well. So, once again, you'd see, do I need to click anything to play this? Oh. Let me see if that plays from there. I don't know if.
Are these open graph cards?
Yes.
Okay. Like, I didn't know it was up for like creating presentations.
Oh, yes. Oh, no, this is for open graph cards. I don't know if that's meant to be a video or not. Anyway, so once again, it was very easy once this app was built to design the Slack app for it. So at the time, I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 prompts to get the initial basis of this built, where not only could we get approval and notifications to say its OG card was submitted, but you could also generate the cards directly in Slack. It felt like I designed this whole website that actually didn't need to be a website. This could all be done in Slack. So at this point, we had the Slack workflows, and now people were like, how do I connect my agent to this? So I have no idea how this works. Like when I work in Cursor or Claude or Codex, like most of the time it's in YOLO mode because I'm going to get a design engineer to review it for me if there's anything that's like security concern, but a lot of code I don't understand. Me having to approve or edit or see the code stream in, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to understand what it means or how that affects what I'm building. So, if there's anything important, I'll get it checked. Like most of the time, if I'm doing anything with databases, I'll review and get that approved before I'm doing it. But adding agents and having an API that people could connect their agents to. So all of this could be done straight through the terminal. But I did get this message as well from the security team, and it said, basically, I'd uploaded all of my OpenAI tokens into the GitHub account. And this is the first time I had any idea of really what a token was. I knew I created this personal OpenAI account. It had like $20 in. It was like not even cents to generate the headlines, but it wasn't included in the git ignore. So it was a nice lesson for me to learn. It wasn't like disastrous, but at the same time, like getting the message from the security team, like almost immediately. Yeah. Stressful. There was a bunch of different design edits. Like we weren't trying to recreate what the Figma tool set was. This was just meant to be like basis so people could reconfigure and reposition images. They could see the grid layout. They could customize and see the different templates and examples. So hopefully there was everything there. Well, there was everything there so they could see and edit and recreate and remix basically the OG card system without having to worry about jumping into Figma. This as well, so all of the icons were just prompted. I think it took maybe 2 or 3 attempts to get some of the initial icons correct. And by the time I had a system in place that they understood the stroke width and the amount of detail that I wanted, the model was just really good at generating icons. So there was this process where I'd be like, hey, I want an icon for an agent. It should have rabbit ears. Generate me this grid. And then I could start being like, hey, I love the ears from '01 and I like the ears from '08. Can we combine this? But having this context of seeing this is what it's going to spit out with all of this design, and then being able to just kind of craft and pick the elements that work. Yeah, amazing. And same for the brand. It felt like it needed its own brand. And this was all generative AI. I think at this time Nano Banana was available, and very iterative, but picking what is the final logo and brand, I feel is where the craft element comes in. And I think that there's a whole myriad of people talking about taste, but in my opinion, taste comes from your experience and your dedication to really understand the basics of what design is, and ultimately that's what makes up taste. So if you understand the principles, anybody can have tastes. Some numbers as well, there's been 400 OG cards shipped, 53 people across Vercel using it, which isn't a huge amount, but it's still saving us as brand designers a bunch of time, and that's how many commits I made to GitHub. And then, all right, I can wrap up relatively quickly now. So we did an offsite at the beginning of the year. I think it was in April. And one of the highlights from our leadership team was we want people to have more fun. And that AI was the floor, but the humans are the ceiling that kind of raise everything up and actually create what's next when it comes to using AI. So for Ship 26, I was okay, I'm going to embody that. And a tech company referencing Black Mirror, I'm not sure if anyone's seen this episode, but we had this idea where what does an agentic world work like? And we need a character, and we want to experiment with what our agent looks like for Ship 26. And the first thing I wanted to do was test one of these Pimperoni devices. So I think GitHub Universe did this as a badge. And we had the idea that what would this work like as a VIP invite for some of our executives. So I have no idea what MicroPython is. There was a documentation on the Pimoroni GitHub where I could kind of port that straight into Claude. And I could just start designing MP4 files, animating them in After Effects and bringing them in, and it would automatically convert them and build software. But it was actually easier for me to build like an Electron app. So if you're familiar with MicroPython, which I'm not, it was easier for me to ask Claude to build an app for me to sync video and code and shaders onto this device using Electron. And ended up with something like this, where I could basically animate in After Effects, drop an MP4 file in, it would convert it, it would make a rough estimate what it would expect to look like on the pixel density. And then I could, it was connected via USB-C, and it would basically ship the files onto the device. And then to talk a little bit more about like the design process of SHIP26. So initially, this was one of the agents that we thought would represent us. And like, I don't know, like I never considered Vercel ever having a mascot, and for sure this isn't the Vercel mascot, but we wanted to do something more fun and kind of bring some personality to it. And one of the final agents that come out of the exploration process was this rabbit agent. We looked at what kind of devices could hold it. So we did like the ticket, we did the badge for the registration like end screen, but how can we capture this agent so it feels like it's tangible? We ended up picking this one here. Everything generated through AI, seeing what that agent looks like, the different types of pixel densities on screens. What that agent looks like in more of a hero space, in the sense that like, cool, can we turn this into our hero? And like graphically, how can we arrange this agent into different formations, and just basically playing with art direction and seeing what was possible. And like, this is the process that we did for SHIP26, in the sense that this is how much I want to get in front of people before they can make a decision or sign something off. We have this like saying called seeing is believing, where it's like if you can get something in front of something that's visual or a prototype, it's a lot easier to get them to understand like, is this going to work? And people loved this. They were like, holy shit, this is amazing, but we're not sure on the rabbit. So then I think, did I do this in, I think this was done in Illustrator, just hand drawing rectangles. Let's do something super meta. We'll just do a terminal screen. This is going to be our agent. Run this through Nano Banana and was like, what does this look like as a sprite sequence? Show me the isometric angles. And as soon as we got sign off on this, like, cool, this is going to be our agent. I started looking at prototyping, like how this experience could come into the actual registration. So these are just some of the ideas I explored, like a chat interface where you could ask about the event, you could ask it what was happening, how to get there, where the after party was, who's talking, based on your recommendations, what would I like? And I built a tool where, based on like the initial configuration, you could customize and like design an agent. So, it was just basically trying to scope out what and what wasn't possible. And there's tools like Rive where you can build state machines, and for me, it seems like we're at a point where it's quicker to design a very specific tool to do something than learn completely new software. So like, I've seen some incredible stuff done in Rive, but me spending like 2 or 3 days doing that versus me spending like 2 hours to build out this prototype to just get buy-in from stakeholders, like this was the perfect move, and they really enjoyed it. So once again, going back to the whole like sharing publicly, I shared publicly, people loved it, but one of our sales engineers called Vico was like, oh, I work with a pixel artist. Would you like the intro? And I was like, hell yeah, like this is all amazing, but I'm not a pixel artist. It's very hard to do. And we had a chat with John, and he was incredible. And yeah, honestly, since he come on board and helped us design and kind of craft the pixel art, you can really see the quality difference. Just everything that he's put into it, it has so much character and personality for such a simple shape. He's designed all of our walk cycles, all of the different sprite sequences. One of the funniest briefs I sent to him was literally just these 3 GIFs on the right. And that was the brief. I was like, we need 4 different sequences of the agent dancing. And he come back with this, and it was just, yeah, it was perfect. So we had the agent, and we had this kind of like character that we were going to continue developing. So we can then start dropping the sprite sheets into the index page, playing with sound and interaction. And once again, it's like, instead of looking for a sound library, it was quicker to just ask for like a MIDI sound player where we could test the different speeds, the different tones. And I don't know how sound works, but when it sounded right, I was like, great, let's get it to go more towards that direction. And we kind of end up with this landing page, like super minimal. You can play with the agents, you can have fun with them. Like, there's a bunch of stuff that we're going to be doing. So SHIP London is happening a week from now, or next Wednesday, sorry. Next Wednesday. And this is going on until San Francisco in October. So like, we wanted to design a brand that we can continue to evolve. It's like 6 months. So we have the base now. We can learn from London. We can learn from New York. And I wanted to show you like what Matty ended up building. So, initially AI generated. Lewis is in the room. He did the 3D modeling. This is where like the craft element comes in. Like, I don't know, Matty is a genius. Lewis is a genius with 3D. So it was so great to work as a team to actually produce something that was super interactive, looked exactly how I visualized it. And once again, like, how do we bring people back to the site once they've registered? This event is going on for 6 months across 5 different cities. There's a bunch of ideas we have. And then to talk a little bit more about like the branding process, so using tools like Flora. So it's like an infinite canvas. My prompts are relatively simple, but just having like the understanding, having a 3D background where I've done so many product renders in my time, where understanding like an orthographic camera to get the type of shot that I want. Like, this is what I had in Figma, and this was what I presented to the wider leadership team. And getting the buy-in on having this visual versus this visual is just it's like day and night. And same with just visualizing everything else. All of the merch that I've been working on, all of the mock-ups of the prints and posters we're doing. Like, it's so much easier to get something that isn't a flat graphic that feels more alive, and it just seems to get to the sign-off much faster. And same with storyboarding. Lewis is working on the motion right now, but like I had GPT-2 and Nanobanana 2 basically take my direction and my idea for the storyboard, generate different frames, but like kind of picking what those frames were and how that story comes together. Like, there's still like artistry involved, and the 3D designer and the motion designer that's going to be working on this, they still need to add that element of like personal touch. But to do this in a day, like, I've done style frame renders where I'm trying to get buy-in on a client, and it takes sometimes weeks to get to this level where you're trying to sell the story and the narrative. And then finally, we're doing an event at the Alternet next week. And this is like one of the most surprised I've ever been about just dropping in a PDF into Claude and being like, hey, this is what we've been sent by the Alternet, and it's like a PDF file that explains the dimensions. There's like 8K screens. This particular room is 4K, but the bigger room we're doing is 8K. And I was like, can you build me an app that can preview shaders, and so I can design directly in scale so I can see and feel what this is going to be like? And we did a test last week, and it's like, it was so nice to be able to test and see all of that stuff beforehand, kind of going into this not so blind. Like previously, if I was doing this in After Effects, I'd be kind of crossing my fingers hoping that things align and stuff like that. But this is the first time they've said anybody's generated like everything completely through code. There was originally I think I like set my laptop up to render this, and it was using like a Playwright, a Chromium web capture. It was having to scale up to 8K. I think I went away for like 3 hours, come back, and it had rendered 3 frames. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And it come back with, it designed a process where it converted it to the web GPU and sent this to modal, and it was able to put like an RX 6000 GPU on it. And I think it was doing like 10 frames per second from that point onwards. And I think the cost was relatively low. It was like $2 per like 2 minutes of animation rendered. So yeah, super happy with how that's come out. We've got another test tomorrow. And then like just to wrap up, like one thing that is most interesting to me right now is like where I struggle the most in like working in brand and generally with AI is that like context is where I kind of have like the biggest hiccups. Like I'm working on way more than I would normally work on, and I'm using Linear, I'm using Notion, but like actually understanding all of the different things I'm doing and how like understanding how I can then tell my team how they can use those tools. And that's the thing I'm most struggling with. So like what I'm currently trying to build myself is like a completely personal agent that can help me with like the management side of it, where I'm calling it Fang. It's like based on Pokemon, where at the moment it's designed that every 2 months it will evolve based on what it learns about me and what it learns about my work processes. So it feels like it's actually benefiting me. Like I've called it like every single like task that's delegated. I've called like a trainer battle. And then at the end of each week, I've called a gym battle. So that's when it does like a one-to-one with me, where it can do one-to-one questions, where it's like a highlight of what happened that week, what went wrong. And then at the end of that, by completing that one-to-one, you get the gym badge. So like, I'd love to speak to anybody that's building personal agents. Like I said, I'm looking for the best way to help me feel less stressed about there being so many different things going on and not knowing how to kind of grasp what's happening. Yeah, thank you.